in their badge at the door every single time, and I hate this badge reader, right? They're being falsely rejected. They have a badge, they know they got to be going in, or else they wouldn't be swiping it 15 times. But they're being falsely rejected. They're generating type 1 errors in your audit logs. Versus if I take my library card out and I swipe that and the door opens, then it was falsely accepted.
Unless you're going to the library.
Unless I'm going to the library. Actually, my bank, they have a little kiosk outside, and literally you can stick any card in a slot, and the little kiosk will open up.
So did you do a test or a survey?
I did a structured evaluation. Alright. The CER is the most important part. This is called your crossover error rate. And the way that this looks is you can graph type 1 errors and type 2 errors out. It might even be in the next slide. Of course not. Alright, so here's the way it looks. Normally there's a graph, you just do an XY graph here, and you have some sort of system like this. So you might have the false acceptance rate or false reject rate. So these are rates of false acceptance versus falsely rejecting. This right here is the crossover error. This is the CER. And what you need to know about it is the lower the CER, the higher the accuracy.
What is that at the top?
It's falsely accepting and falsely rejecting. There's just two graphs here, and where that intersection meets, that's called the crossover error rate. So you can always measure the accuracy of the biometric system by the lower the CER number, the better. Now you'll never have to calculate these. It's not like, unless you're benchmarking biometric equipment, but the vendor they'll do all this. They're gonna benchmark all this stuff. So you have like a thumbprint reader. They're literally gonna have a fake thumb and just swipe the thing 1,000,000 times. And out of 1,000,000, how many times were you falsely accepted versus falsely rejected? And then they'll graph all these out so that they can basically use that as a selling point in terms of the accuracy of their products. So it will matter to you guys if you're ever in a sales meeting with somebody who is trying to sell you biometric equipment. They will brag about their CER numbers and their false accepting and false rejecting.
So the lower the CER, the higher the...
Lower the CER, the higher the accuracy. Lower the CER, the higher the accuracy. So CER 2 is more accurate than a CER of 3. You guys with me, Sam? Alright. So fingerprint, these are the easy stuff, right? Measures the ridges on your fingers. And if you're going to store it, here's just an example one, but it basically copies it, gives you a digital equivalent of your finger, and then when you authenticate to the system, it's basically a one-to-one matching. In other words, you've got one piece of it, and the other digital equipment is stored in a database somewhere. So when you swipe your finger, it matches up to what you swiped to, is there something in the database? If there is, you get authenticated. If there isn't, well, it's not you. Try again. Next, you got palm scan. Again, it compares it's one-to-one and gets a referenceable file, and it can include fingerprints and everything else on the palm. There's a whole new study of palmprints now in criminal analysis.
Well, they were saying that the veining is also more like the most accurate.
What is it?
The veining.
Yeah, everybody has different vein patterns.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of things that you can use to actually map when it comes to biology, what you can choose to map it out. Do you do it based off of the distance between the valleys of your fingerprints versus the peaks? So do you do a peak to valley ratio, or maybe you don't have a finger, so that would change between the peaks and valleys. So there's whoever comes up with this stuff is more brilliant than I am. Next, you got hand geometry. This will actually do points on your hand and vector it out. So maybe Captain Spock's going to have a different hand geometry than somebody else. It's your natural geometry of your hand. Again, it's comparing what you supply to what's in the system. And you see these quite commonly on movies and things like that. Then you got retina. Retina begins with the R. Blood is red. So this must look at the blood vessels. But you have to look, basically into the lens. Now most people don't, if I said, in order for accountability purposes, everybody has to sign the attendance sheet. Anybody object to that? Now what if I change it and say, in order to be authenticated for this class, everybody has to stick their eyeball in the eyeball reader. Now we got a couple no's already. Right? So there's a difference between user acceptance and accuracy, and you really could order these two lists if you wanted to. Some systems are more accurate than others. What do you think is more accurate, retina scanner or signature dynamics?
Retina scanner.
Right. Which one do you think is more accepted by people?
Signature.
There you go. So there's two ways to look at this. Iris scan. It's the color portion of the eye. Irises are colorful. Eyes are colorful. So iris scan must measure the eye. Colors around the eye. Signature dynamics. That's an easy one. That's writing style. Keyboard dynamics. That's easy. How fast you type. What does that look like? This is considered the least effective, but it's more secure than a standard password. Then you got voice print, speech, volume, sounds, or pattern of a person's voice. This works good till you hit puberty. Then all of a sudden your voice dynamics change. Or if you're sick, or you're sick, you could lose your voice. Or if you're a singer, I could throw it off. Then you got facial scan, scanning a person's face. People have different structures, noses, ridge, eyes, ears. You can even go do a video of Michael Jackson's, it don't matter if it's black or white, and they morph all the faces, difference in the faces, and there's a slight overlap between the different faces in the video. You can do that here. Then you got hand topology, similar to hand geometry, but less concise. Looks at the size and the width of the hand as well as the fingers. Not necessarily vectoring it out as hand geometry, but geometry being the key distinguishing factor. Geometry is, vector-oriented. This is Then you got authentication. You can authenticate somebody on something you know, something you have, or something you are. So circle that. So if I say a password or a PIN, you would say?
Something you know.
If I say a biometric device, you would say? If I say a smart card or a token device. There you go, piece of cake, right? So, you have two-factor authentication. This means that you have at least 2 out of these 3. That is considered strong authentication. So what would be considered stronger? A 30-character password of uppercase, lowercase, and special characters, or an 8-character password with one of the other 2.
8-character or one of the other 2.
Right. Even though the password's weaker, you're combining 2 out of the 3, and that's stronger than just any one of the 1 isolated.
Or the other one is so complicated you want to break it down so you can remember it.
Which happens day in and day out. You must know two-factor authentication and know have an R.
What was the last thing you said? You must know two-factor authentication.
You must know two-factor authentication. You must know that means 2 out of the 3. That's worth 1 free practice test question. All right?
Two-factor authentication does not mean your ID and your token.
Right. That is a very good point. That is 1 factor. Your user ID and your password go together. They are coupled as in something you know. Username and password, it's not 2 out of the 3.
But the smart card with a PIN is 2 of the 3.
You know the PIN, you have the smart card.
Right.
Exactly. So there's several different types of authentication. You got passwords, one-time passwords, token device, cryptographic keys, memory cards, smart cards. Different operating systems can use different methods of these. We need to know all of these right here. And we're going to get into these.
One-time password would be pretty secure since it changes daily. systems that use that?
It all depends on the reference that you see, but one-time passwords are often called the perfect encryption scheme, or one-time pad is the perfect encryption scheme. But basically, you use it once, so that by the time I try to go reuse your password, it's already changed, or it's expired. So your RSA key fobs, they are synchronous, and they change. They have 2 clocks, one on the client side, one on the server side, and the time is synchronized, so every 30 seconds the number changes. Your PIN stays the same, but the number changes. So in theory, it's unique. Your password is unique on a 30 or 60 second time interval, which is pretty good. So passwords. Here, we can buy ourselves some time here, right? Very common, very popular. Basically, you just need a username and password. One of the weakest forms. You should know that a password is one of the weakest forms. It's easily shared. People go to security awareness training, but they don't write, they go back to their desk and they write down their passwords anyway. You could do a password generator if you wanted to. But then again, you take the likelihood of it being too complex. People just write them down anyway. All right, so require passwords to be renewed periodically. Why?
Make life difficult.
Just to make life difficult. I got it for 200.
So if somebody else comes across it, it's got a limited exposure.
Well, the whole thing with the renew it periodically, or like let's say every 30 days you have to change your password. Why? Let's say Leo captures the password, and I got it, but it's only in the form of its encrypted form. Well, I still got to go back to the lab and turn it from ciphertext into clear text, and it may take greater than 30 days to do that. So even if I do crack the password, well, it's already changed. It should have certain lengths. Why? Technical folks, now's your chance.
The longer they are.
You can't do brute force attack.
Brute force.
Says who?
Both of us.
Why? Technically, can you prove it?
Yeah, actually, yes.
How?
I can't do the math, but yes, the math is done.
All right, well, let me give you an example. Here's the technical piece of this. Why do we have a minimum of 8 lengths for a password? Where'd that come from, right? Well, LAN Manager, the old LAN Manager password, like, your early Windows days, the password hash was broken down into 2 halves. 7 characters, 7 characters and 7 characters. So if your password was less than 8 characters, the second half of the hash was always the same. So just when I open up the SAM file and I look at it, I could look for all of the second half and see the pattern of basically it ended in EE. So I just looked for all those, and that told me every single user account that was less than 8 characters, and then those are the passwords that I should spend my time cracking because they would happen. I could crack them the fastest. So use your password, have passwords greater than 8 characters. What that does for you is it takes that second half of that hash and changes it, so you can't see the pattern when you do an audit. So that's where that came from, the minimum of 8 characters instead of 7. Or greater than 14 too, for that same reason, because of LAN Manager, NTLM, and version 1 and version 2 of that. You should have also uppercase, lowercase, and special characters. Agree?
Yes.
There you go. One-time passwords, they're only used once. They can be either synchronous or asynchronous. So your RSA key fob that you carry around that changes every 30 or 60 seconds, that's synchronous because it's time dependent. Also, asynchronous is extremely important, right? Anybody use online banking these days?
Yeah.
Right, you do your password. Anybody have to do a password reset? Mm-hmm. All right, just say, where would you like me to send your password? And it'll send it to something you have. Like you have an email account or you have a phone. It'll SMS it to you or it'll email it to you. And basically, you can check your phone or your email. And then you get that email, and then you got to take your little code, you put it back in the web browser, and it sends it to you. But there's no time in that whatsoever. But it does send it to something you have. So it's a way to, I guess, do this in a way that's not time dependent. But you better have that device, or else you're not going to get the password to where it's sent to. But that challenge was a one-time process. Here's your RSA token devices. These are synchronous devices. And these normally contain a password plus your 4-digit PIN. But you can still attack these types of systems. I could, in theory, if I can get a hold of this device, that's half of the equation, right? What's the other half? The PIN. And people use the same pins for everything. The same pin for the credit card, the same pin that you shoulder surf them on the door, the same pin for their email, the same pin for everything. So if you shoulder surf and you watch them do 1, 2, 3, 4, well, now you know their pin, and chances are use that for everything. It's probably the same one they use on their ATM card. More than likely. Then you got cryptographic key. I want you to circle private key here. So basically a CAC card, but on the CAC card, a private key. You need to know that 100%. So what this does for you is it ties in not only something you have, but it basically ties in non-repudiation. Well, I'll do it later. We'll get into this piece of it when we hit cryptography. I'm going to make sure you guys know this inside and out. But in this system, it's asymmetric, so there's a public and private key. Private key you hold goes nowhere, basically tied to you and your identity, and then the public key can go anywhere. So the public key, actually, keyword here, I want you to circle this, verifies, and we know we're not on it now, we're going to circle it for later. It verifies the identity. You sign something with your private key, you verify it with your public key. They call this digitally signing. You should also know what a passphrase is. This is longer than a passphrase, password, and so it would be something like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
Well, I know what your password is now.
That's right. Even if I told you my password, you couldn't guess my password.
Boy, that sounds challenging.
Challenging?
It's the implementation.
Huh?
It's the implementation.
Right, I can tell you that my password is 7 years ago, but there's 1,000 different ways to implement that. I could do it all backwards for all you know, and unless you figure out we'll just type the whole thing in reverse, you know. Not that that's what I do, but maybe I do. All right, our access control systems are very cool to learn about. Then you got smart cards. This is where your PIN, notice your screen changes here. You put something in that you have, and then you also have to authenticate with something you know.
That's an old screenshot.
Yeah, you like that? Good old days, right?
OS2 would have been better.
The good old days.
OS2 would have been better.
The days where job security meant something.
NMCI, so you do that.
I wouldn't be surprised. Job security for us. Then you got authentication protocols. There's different, circle all of these. On the bottom here, you need to know all of them. There's different ways to actually get the authentication from the client to the server. So we got to prove it. So hey, didn't I say, what is the authentication? I said authentication means what?
Prove it.
Prove it. You got to prove it. And you can get proved by your username and password. Or whatever, something you absolutely know something you are. So there are protocols that we will become experts at that will do this authentication for us. One of the most popular ones nowadays is Kerberos. And we'll get into that later, but you basically, it's responsive. It's the three-headed dog, comes out of MIT, and they got a whole architecture to it, and we're going to see it inside now. Then you got Sesame, which is very similar to Kerberos. It's just a PKI system. Then you got the very old system of LAN Manager, and that's where the less than 7 characters per password came from. And then Microsoft NT4.0 later was NTLM, New Technology LAN Manager. And then, of course, you can do complete certificate-based, which is X.509. That's a type of certificate. Other types of authentication protocols. So here's authentication protocols, network-based, and then you have basically dial-up-based as a result, which is, this is a good, very, very good breakdown between network-based and then dial-up-based. So here's what you need to know. Password authentication protocol, some clear text. Clear text authentication. So if somebody can sniff the traffic, they can see it. And so that wasn't secure. So they decided to come up with basically a challenge and response, or a hash-based system, so that the password never goes across the network. So let's explain that. I want to make sure that the password does not go across the network. All right. So let's say that I have a file here, and that file is a password file. So inside the file there's password, PWD. What the hashing algorithms do is they analyze this file, or your password equivalent, or just your password or the file, either way. They're going to analyze this and basically give you a result. That result is called the message digest. Write that down. So if I take the contents, if I analyze the contents of this file and summarize that in terms of a message digest, or any one of these hash-based authentication mechanisms, I can send the hash over the network, and then the password never has to go across the network. Because you cannot do the reverse. I can't take my message digest and reproduce the password. You can't run the function in reverse. The only way to really do this is to, somebody else would have to type the same password, and then you can compare that password to its output. So somebody had to have pre-computed it. And we call those rainbow tables. Write that down. Rainbow tables. It's important to note here, extremely fundamentally, critically, fundamentally important to know that these hashing algorithms, they don't change the contents of the file. I analyze this file and get an output, and it tells me exactly what it is. And it cannot be changed in any way, shape, or form. Got it? Especially the hashing algorithms, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to guarantee integrity. So it would make no sense whatsoever to analyze this file and change the file while you're trying to prove that it hasn't been changed. That's what encryption is for. Encryption changes things around from clear text to ciphertext. Integrity doesn't. It cannot change things. It's the exact opposite in that sense. These are polar opposites. Confidentiality versus availability. Does this make sense? Integrity versus confidentiality. Thank you. They're polar opposites. Here, our sole purpose is to change. Change for the purpose of hiding. Here, we don't want to change whatsoever. So when we run an MD5 or SHA or anything, or any one of those tools, you can't change things in the process, or else you'd violate your own integrity check, which you're trying to prevent from happening. So that it's fundamentally important that you get that piece of it. So these are more dial-up based. So the rest of these, except for EAP here, these are all basically hash oriented. So Shiva is based off a Shiva standard, which is basically a hash. It analyzes your password, sends the hash over, and your password stays on your system. Challenge handshake. There's so many vendors that support this, it's not even funny. But this was the replacement of chat. Because remember, in the 90s, every ISP and every dial-up gave you your dial-up account. You could dial up to them, and you could authenticate, and you get your email account. I'm talking like the beginning of AOL days. So everybody used PAT. And nobody cared. And remember, nobody cared back then. So you could have your password going across the network. Who cared? Nothing really bad happened. I don't want to say that. I just say it went clear text. So they replaced that with Shiva, which was vendor-oriented, and then Chat, which anybody could use because it was multi-vendor. And then Microsoft decided at the same time in history, they decided to go their own way, and they came up with Microsoft's Chat. And then Chat version 2. And each time they added a little bit more strength to the process. But then you have Mr. Extensible, write this down, you need to circle this one. You got extensible authentication protocol. That comes into play because, well, what if we want to authenticate you based off of your fingerprint? We're going to need a way to package that up and get some sort of digital equivalent of your thumbprint and use that for authentication.
So that's a way of like trying to run like a biometric type of.
Exactly what it's for. It's for everybody else. And so you can do whatever you want. You want to write your own authentication method because that's what you want to do in college or a project, or hey, maybe you just got a lot of free time. You're going to need extensible authentication protocol to do that. Because you can write your own authentication.
Is that only dial-up based?
What is it?
Is that just dial-up
Oh,
based?
no, it's not
protocol?
limited. Here we throw it in because we're showing the evolution here, so it's easy to kind of group it there. But you can use the EAP for wireless devices, and it's not limited to dial-up.
So would that be considered customizable authentication?
It's exactly what it is. Customizable. You, the vendor, can write whatever you want. So if you want to write your own, Linux-based authentication and use extensible authentication protocol, go ahead, go to town. I just assume try to find somebody else's drivers. And then if you got MD5, which I just explained, you basically analyze the file, you get an output, and you can use that to authenticate. So let's prove some stuff here. Let's try to prove stuff. I'm going to go to my hard drive here, go to my C drive, and I want you to see this MD5 sum. Everybody see that MD5 sum?
Yeah.
You do or you don't?
Yes.
Okay. And let me actually change this. I'm going to write the word password with a capital P, @SSW0RD. I'm going to save this document. And I'm going to go to the command prompt. You guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to do go work out of the proper directory. And I'm going to do MD5 sum for password.txt. And it gives me my message digest. Okay, so I want to prove the IAC triad. So I'm going to open it. I opened this up and I show it to you. What part of the triad that I just proved? I disclosed it. So what are we doing here? Confidentiality or integrity? I just disclosed it to you, so it's no longer secret. It's no longer private. Agree or disagree? No. Confidentiality. Disclosure is confidentiality. Integrity has to deal with changing it. So now that I've disclosed, and let's prove it. Now that I've disclosed this to you, what's going to happen if I run it again? Is it going to be the same or is it going to be different? If there has been no changes, modifications, or alterations, it's the same. So I'm proving disclosure has nothing to do with integrity. Agree or disagree?
Agree.
Okay. So let's change it. Let's do password, and I'm going to save it. And I go back to MD5 sum. I'm going to run it again. What's going to happen?
Changed.
It's going to change, and it ends in .99 or 99. And now I'm going to change it back. I think that's what it was. Now what's going to happen? Do I get a new one, or does it return to the old one?
That'll go back to the old one.
Raise your hand if you think it goes back to the old one. Raise your hand if you think you get a new one. 50-50 here. We should put money on the table. It goes back to the original one. Why?
Because it's the exact
using
same.
the
Well, it's nothing more than
That
It didn't change your file.
Well, I mean, but all it is though isn't it just a? It just uses the
file is-
hexadecimal code, right? For
Just the data. It just looks at the data.
Right.
So let's prove it. I go to password, I go to properties, I'll make it read-only. Would you agree that when I hit that, or let's make it unhidden and then read-only? No, let's not make it read-only because that makes it harder for my lab. It was hidden before, now it's unhidden. I'm going to hit apply. So I've changed the attributes, right? Agree?
Yep.
So now what's going to happen when I run it again?
Shouldn't change.
Just reading the
No,
data.
it shouldn't change.
No, it shouldn't. Because it's the content, not the attributes. So it doesn't matter who the permissions are on the file or anything like that. It's the content. So all I'm doing here is I'm using MD5 to actually analyze the contents of the file and give me an output. Analyze the contents, give me an output. Analyze the contents, give me an output.